Annyeonghaseyo from the continuation of Nick's trip through Asia, or something like that. I haven't exactly nailed the Korean language yet. I'm walking around this country hitting people with the most accidental and subtly passive-aggressive arigatos of all time because I was there for a week. I mean, I accidentally speak Spanish in Japan, so it's not really Korea's issue, it's more of a me thing. But as there's 10 or so more days left in my Asia trip and I'm out of banked videos, start getting used to new and fun, interesting, differing backgrounds. Today's background is brought to you from Hongdae, Seoul, on a rainy day in Korea. Today I went to the DMZ, figured out that Kim Jong-un's kind of a bad guy, and also they sell beauty products there. It's a weird country. I'm happy to be here. Anyways, while I was traveling between Japan and Korea recently, I was scrolling through TikTok, and occasionally my TikTok decides to serve me the real content I'm looking for, which is just repurposed parts of Naruto's story. And as I sat there and I basically just rewatched Naruto a minute and a half at a time, I eventually got to one of the most interesting and misunderstood parts in the entirety of Naruto's story. Madara versus the 5 Kage. A fight that the majority of casual Naruto enjoyers remember being an incredibly one-sided affair from the likes of Madara, but a fight that people who have consumed the manga or the anime of Naruto a couple of times will know is actually a lot closer than just a casual one-sided whomping. See, not only is the Madara versus the 5 Kage fight longer than you remember, but the Kage themselves do a pretty comprehensive job against what is essentially the strongest enemy any of them have ever had to fight. However, those who do remember this fight as a one-sided beatdown aren't necessarily in the wrong, because when Madara does get truly serious about the battle, well, the tone shifts a little bit. But this fight serves as an incredible example to display just how powerful an individual Kage can be, let alone when they're working together with 4 others. And thus, as I sat there and rewatched this fight and saw all the combination jutsus that the high-level Kage were able to pull off in tandem in the battle against Madara, I couldn't help but think to myself, who else but Madara could win this fight? See, yes, Madara, with the perfected Edo Tensei body, Hashirama cells, and 2 Rinnegan, was able to come out victorious in this battle against the 5 Kage. But could Madara have accomplished this feat while he was still alive? Could any of the other participants in the 4th Great Shinobi World War have accomplished this feat? And maybe, more importantly than anything, who couldn't accomplish this feat? Well, today I want to answer that question specifically and cite reasons and sources to explain why certain people either could or couldn't defeat the iteration of 5 Kage we see fight against Madara in the 4th Great War. Because today we're talking who could beat the 5 Kage. But before we get to diving into who stands toe-to-toe in strengths with the likes of an Edo Tensei Madara, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. So, before we get to doing a deep dive on what characters I genuinely believe would stand a fair to good shot against the 5 Kage simultaneously, I want to give you a quick rundown on how exactly the battle went between Madara and these 5 Kage. See, because only by understanding exactly what both Madara and the Kage were able to pull off in this battle, and therefore understanding the limitations of both the interested parties, are we able to truly say definitively that a certain character would be able to defeat the Kage or not. So let's quickly go over the 2 sides of this incredibly legendary battle. See, the iteration of Madara that we got in this fight is undoubtedly stronger than Madara ever was during his lifetime. Madara, when he was brought back to life during the 4th Great Shinobi World War, was not only brought back with a perfected, prime, peak body from Kabuto, something that nobody else brought back with Edo Tensei got the privilege of, but he was also Edo Tensei, which means he had infinitely refilling chakra and an infinite regeneration factor, meaning the only way that it could possibly be defeated was to be sealed. Something that, rather unfortunately, only one of the 5 Kage in this fight is even slightly proficient at. And while Gaara is one of the most accomplished Fuinjutsu users in the entirety of Naruto's story, the likes of Tsunade, Inoki, Mai, and A are not well suited for a battle against somebody that needs to be sealed. On top of this, Madara was brought back to life with both of his Rinnegan, something he didn't have until the very end of his life. On top of this, he also had the ability to switch back to his MS from his Rinnegan, meaning he was able to access things like the extrasensory perception of the Sharingan and his Susanoo. And we know from characters now, like Hidari and Boruto, that the ability to switch between a Sharingan and a Rinnegan is kind of massive because a Rinnegan doesn't grant the extrasensory perception to do things like cancel out the tunnel vision of a Raikiri or a Chidori. On top of this, Madara was brought back with Hashirama's cells grafted onto him. And while in this part of the story, he hadn't yet unlocked the ability to use Hashirama's Sage Mode, just having Hashirama's Hashirama's cells grafted onto him undoubtedly raised the ceiling on Madara's chakra. And if you raise the ceiling on the amount of chakra that you have access to, you're able to raise the power level of your ninjutsu, genjutsu, and even taijutsu. And while it would also confer healing factor, unfortunately because Madara at this point was an Edo Tensei reincarnation, a healing factor doesn't necessarily matter. He's always going to infinitely heal given enough time. So with all this in mind, how does this fight pan out for the likes of both Madara and the 5 Kage? Well, better than a lot of us remember, at least for the Kage. See, this battle actually starts out with A, the 4th Raikage, speed blitzing Madara. And when Madara is recovering from A's attack, he actually has to use his Susanoo to block the acidic mud of Mai, the Mizukage, implying that he doesn't have the durability to be hit by it, at least the durability sans Susanoo. And while Mai's acidic mud is easily reflected by just a Susanoo ribcage, this implies that Madara in base can absolutely be injured by even the likes of the Mizukage, who amongst these 5 Kage was probably the weakest. Madara then, after blocking Mai's acidic mud, forms a half-full Susanoo, his non-armored version, kind of like his Susanoo Golem version that he puts on all of his clones, and launches the range attack of the majority of the Susanoos outside of the likes of Sasuke's, the Magatama, at the Kage. However, the Magatama are blocked through a combination of Gaara's Sand Shield and Inoki's Stone Golem, implying that the Kage have a level of durability with their ninjutsu to cancel out one of the strongest attacks of Madara, his Susanoo Magatama. After his Magatama are blocked, Gaara then goes to seal Madara using his Grand Sand Mausoleum. However, this iteration of Grand Sand Mausoleum that Gaara tries to use doesn't have his magnet release curse marks. And while we're not entirely sure how magnet release makes sealing jutsus more powerful, it is a well-known fact that when we see the curse marks of either Shukaku or Gaara or any magnet release users on a sand-based Fuin jutsu, that it's going to be stronger. However, Madara is able to break out of this Grand Sand Mausoleum with relative ease. And this isn't the only time that he would break out of the Grand Sand Mausoleum, which is effectively the Kage's only way to stop Madara. It's at this point that the Kage realize that they're in for a harder and longer fight than even they anticipated. And it's also at this point that Kabuto, through the medium of Mu, tries to interject into the fight. However, the combination of Inoki using lightweight boulder jutsu and A in his lightning cloak form allows them to increase the speed of A to not only one-shot Mu out of the fight, but also speed blitz Madara even faster than he could react to, allowing them to instantly wipe out not only a Madara clone, but a Susanoo-cladded Madara clone. And maybe it's because Madara saw Inoki as the only genuine threat to his life, which is something that he himself admits to, and Inoki was now the fastest member on the battlefield on the back of A, who was already too fast for Madara to keep up with, that Madara decided to truly in this moment get much more serious about this battle, using a deep forest emergence that he now has access to because of Hashirama's cells to cover the entire battlefield in a growth of roots that release a toxic gas that puts those in it asleep, and if they stay asleep in this toxic gas for long enough, they die. And thus, just like that, all 5 of the Kage begin to fall asleep, and the only Kage who's able to stay awake is Inoki, once again kind of confirming that Madara had every right to be afraid of Inoki, because Inoki is the biggest threat to him throughout the entirety of this fight. And thus, as Inoki is about to join his other Kage in unconsciousness, he literally looks over on the ground and sees a rock, and that's enough motivation for him to be like, oh, let me go ahead and use the biggest ever dust release we've ever seen, lasering away the entirety of the deep forest emergence and hitting Madara, who was floating above it, glancingly. Now, because the entirety of the deep forest emergence is blown away, so is the smoke that put all the Kage to sleep, and thus they're all able to rise back onto their feet and rejoin the fight. Madara is able to immediately heal from the glancing blow that he got from dust release. However, it was a glancing blow at best, because the only damage that we see inflicted by it is actually cosmetic. It blows away his armor. And this is important because we're going to talk about every single time that Madara would have died in this fight if he didn't have the infinite regeneration of Edo Tensei. Now, it's at this point that Tsunade activates her strength of 100 seal. He flies at Madara either so quickly that he barely has time to react, or because Madara is curious about how powerful Tsunade, Hashirama's granddaughter, is, that she's able to land a blow on Madara that cracks his Susanoo ribcage. And in this moment, Madara realizes that he needs to retreat from Tsunade. He identifies that Tsunade stands a legitimate threat of injuring him. As Madara is retreating from Tsunade, A appears behind him and also cracks his Susanoo ribcage, which leaves an opening for Tsunade to kick straight up through Madara's Susanoo ribcage, shattering it. And it's this point that Tsunade punches straight through Madara's chest, blowing a dinner plate size hole through his chest that would have killed basically any other opponent. But remember, of course, Madara is an Edo Tensei reincarnation, so he's able to heal immediately. However, once again, without the infinite regeneration of Edo Tensei, he would be dead in this moment. Now, an argument could be made that Madara is not going full out here, and if he was going full out, this blow never would have happened, but it's still an important piece of information to note, because it implies not only does Tsunade Tsunade have the ability to punch through a Madara Susanoo ribcage, but it also implies that she has enough AP to break his durability. And no, I will not be hearing any arguments that durability is lessened in an Edo Tensei form because you're made of paper mache and dust. There is literally no evidence to support that. There is probably some evidence to support the fact that Edo Tensei reincarnations are more willing to be hit, but I'm not lowering the AP feats of those who are able to inflict damage upon an Edo Tensei body. After this, after Madara's reeling from having his chest punched out by Tsunade, Gaara once again tries to catch him in a Grand Sand Mausoleum, this time with curse marks. And rather interestingly, outside of simply trying to break out of the Grand Sand Mausoleum here, Madara actually chooses to dodge this one, as he allows a wood clone to be captured by the Grand Sand Mausoleum and hides himself underground so that he can stab Tsunade. Now, does this imply that Madara wouldn't be able to break out of a curse-sealed Grand Sand Mausoleum? We can't really say, but it is worth noting that he dodged this one rather than break out of it. Inoki then fires another dust release at Madara that he absorbs with the Rinnegan, as the Rinnegan allows him to absorb all ninjutsu, Keke Toda included. But it's at this point that things start to get real bleak for the 5 Kage, as Madara uses his Shadow Clone Jutsu, and then proceeds to ask the Kage if he would like for his Shadow Clones to use Susanoo. I'm assuming they say yes because he just gives them all Susanoo. I wouldn't have said yes. I would have said no, please and thank you, sir, but I don't know, maybe they got more ego than I do. Now, it's this point that Tsunade, by herself, wipes out a Madara clone with the Susanoo. And while A is fighting against multiple clones simultaneously, he's caught by one of them, and Madara uses a Genjutsu on him. Now, it's unclear exactly what this Genjutsu does, but it does make A immobile until Inoki's able to break him out of it. Inoki then looks around to all the other Kage and says, all right, guys, let's wipe the dust off our shoulders and go die with a little bit of honor. And as all of the 20 or so Susanoo-cladded Madara clones begin to close in on the Kage, Inoki fires a gigantic dust release that destroys 10 to 12 of them, and also one that hits Madara. Now, mind you, Madara has interacted with Dust Release 3 times over the course of this fight, and in 2 of those 3 situations, Madara has been hit. When Inoki used Dust Release to destroy the Deep Forest Emergence, Madara was hit. When Inoki tried to fire a Dust Release just at Madara, Madara was able to absorb it. But in this circumstance, because the Dust Release Inoki uses is so wide-sweeping, and because Madara has to get rid of the Susanoo around him to use the absorption ability of the Rinnegan, because otherwise he would just absorb his Susanoo, he is once again hit by Dust Release, this time losing his arm, his leg, and a fair bit of his torso, which would once again be fatal to anybody who wasn't an Edo Tensei reincarnation. And you can't say that he wasn't trying to avoid this. He was. He's angry at himself that he was surprised by Inoki in this moment. And in genuinely any other circumstances, I don't want to hear anything about Madara not going all out, because if Madara, one of the most prideful people in the entire show, would allow for some kid that he beat the snot out of when he wasn't even Tsuchi Kage yet to be an 80-year-old man who put him in a situation where he was trying to avoid attack but couldn't, does not seem like a very Madara thing to do to me. And thus, this is 2 separate times that if Madara was not an Edo Tensei reincarnation, that he would have died in the battle against the 5 Kage. And now he didn't, because him being an Edo Tensei reincarnation is absolutely a part of his strength we need to factor in. This is information that we can and will use against other people who are going to be placed in this fight. However, because Madara was so upset about being hit by Inoki, he decides, all right, let's do the whole full power thing. And it's this point that he manifests his perfect Susanoo, gets really angry, cuts a mountain in half, and starts talking about Hashirama, his former lover. So what is Madara's full power? Well, let's do some scaling. Madara in this state has ninjutsu absorption, wood release, infinite healing, a heightened ninjutsu, genjutsu, and taijutsu output on account of Hashirama's cells, no sage mode yet, but infinitely refilling chakra, high level genjutsu usage, FTL feats by keeping up with A in lightning cloak form, no real FTL plus feats because he wasn't fast enough to keep up with lightweight boulder jutsu and lightning cloak A. And while we don't necessarily have any hard feats to calculate exactly how fast that Inoki A combo is, we do know pretty discernibly for a fact that A using lightning cloak is closely FTL or relativistic. And in the fact that Madara was able to keep up with that version of A but not the Inoki boosted version of A seems to imply that A got a lot faster with lightweight boulder jutsu. So all in all, he's an absolute menace to society. He's terrifyingly strong, one of the strongest people that we've ever seen in Naruto in just that form. And mind you, that's 2 forms away from his final form. However, in this form, everything below perfect Susanoo, both Tsunade and Inoki could destroy. But since Madara's perfect Susanoo literally cuts a mountain in half the second that it's shown, we can assume that its AP is somewhere in the region of mountain level, and its DP should probably be comparable. On top of that, his stamina and healing factor are infinite, all with relativistic to FTL speeds. And therefore, the only people who stand any chance of being able to pull off what Madara pulled off, the defeat of all 5 Kage simultaneously, need to have better stats than that. So who could do it? Well, it's important to note that there's a ton of characters from Boruto who could do it. But today, we're not going to be talking about Boruto characters because one, that would make the video way longer than it needs to be, and two, I don't genuinely find it that interesting to compare Naruto feats to Boruto feats because the power scaling has gone kind of wacky. But to get out of the way, Boruto, Kawaki, Momoshiki, Ishiki, and most likely Tensei Gonfom Toneri could all pull it off. Pretty much any Otsutsuki would be able to pull it off because Madara at this moment was weaker than even the weakest Otsutsukis we've ever seen. I'd recommend the level of power that Madara had at this moment in time is comparable to that of Kinshiki, the weakest ever Otsutsuki we've ever seen. So yes, every Otsutsuki in existence is most likely clearing the 5 Kage simultaneously. This corroborated heavily by the fact that really the only reason that the current age 5 Kage, when they battled against Kinshiki and Momoshiki, came out victorious was the fact that Naruto and Sasuke were also there. And while yes, I understand that the combined efforts of Darui, Korotsuchi, Gaara, and Chojuro were enough to defeat Kinshiki, kind of. And today we're talking about individuals who'll be able to take on these 5 Kage simultaneously. That doesn't necessarily matter. So with all that in mind, what Naruto characters could clear this feat? Well, since we're talking about Madara, his dead ex-husband is probably the first name that comes to mind, with Hashirama. However, it's very, very clearly established that Edo Hashirama does not equal Edo Madara. The version of Hashirama that's brought back doesn't get a peak body and a bunch of new attributes and abilities. And while it's never necessarily confirmed, it is heavily implied that the version of Hashirama we got in the 4th Great Shinobi World War was nowhere near living strength Hashirama, which makes the pill of Hashirama losing to Madara in one-on-one combat a bit easier to swallow. But if Edo Hashirama isn't as strong as Edo Madara, is Edo Hashirama able to win against these 5 Kage simultaneously? I say no. See, because here's the thing. While alive Hashirama may equal the strength of Edo Madara, even that kind of feels like a stretch to assume. Yes, we know that alive Hashirama was stronger than alive Madara. He won time and time again in one-on-one combat against Madara. He won so clear-handedly that Madara had to go recruit Kurama, ride him into combat, and still lose. However, Tobirama's presence at the end of that fight may imply to us that Tobirama was a part of this battle. And while Tobirama isn't on the level of either Hashirama or Madara, that is something we need to consider. And while during this fight between Madara and the 5 Kage, he says that the only person who would be able to take me on right now, I'm talking about Madara, is Hashirama. We're talking about an iteration of Madara that was brought back with all of the abilities he had while he was alive, Hashirama's Cell, and dual Rinnegan. And would release is still ninjutsu. It's absorbable with the Rinnegan. So as unfortunate as it sounds for all of us Hashirama truthers out there, I don't think alive Hashirama clutches up this battle against the 5 Kage. Yes, I understand that alive Hashirama's healing factor is probably comparable to the healing factor that Madara had as an Edo Tensei reincarnation. But there's more ways to defeat Hashirama than sealing him. You could just cut off his head. Something that simply wouldn't work against Madara. Well, actually, we don't know if it would work against Hashirama, but we can assume. So listen, while I do believe that alive Hashirama stands about as good a chance as anybody who's not an Edo Tensei reincarnation, I do think that if he wins, it's in a very high diff fight. And if the fight was to occur 10 times, Hashirama would probably only win 4 of those times. Because listen, while people like to make fun of the 5 Kage that battled against Madara, they are 5 legit shinobi. A is the culmination of 4 generations of lightning users in the hidden cloud. Mai is able to wield 2 separate Kikki at a ridiculously high level. Inoki was shown to be roughly half as strong as Madara in their fight. Tsunade has the strength of 100, the ability to summon Lady Katsuyo, the ability to destroy Madara's clones. And Gaara's Fuinjutsu is so incredibly powerful that Madara deemed it necessary to avoid. So I'm afraid I can't give it to a live Hashirama. We just don't have enough feats. But what about other people that also participated in the 4th Great Shinobi World War? It also got Edo Tensei forms. Like, oh, I don't know, another Rinnegan user, like Edo Nagato. Well, let's examine that. Edo Nagato is involved in a fair amount of battles in the 4th Great Shinobi World War that we can use to scale how strong he was and compare that to Edo Madara. And by far and away, the most impressive battle that Nagato is involved in is his battle against KCM1 Naruto, Killer Bee, and Itachi. 3 people who at the time of fighting against Nagato were easily high Kage level. In fact, I would make the argument that the combo of Itachi, Killer Bee, and Naruto in these current forms that they had are a comparable fighting force to the combined forces of all 5 Kage. It's not crazy to assume that A and KCM1 Naruto are comparable in strength. It's also not crazy to assume that Killer Bee and Inoki are also somewhat comparable in strength. It is also not crazy to say that Edo Itachi equals the combined strength of Mai, Gaara, and Tsunade. In actuality, if you were to put these 3 up against the 5 Kage, I think that would be one of the most compelling hypothetical fights you could have in the entirety of the Naruto universe. And in actuality, these are probably the 3 that should have been fighting against Madara, but they were fighting against Edo Nagato. And how did that go for Nagato? Well, not well, as Nagato wasn't able to overcome the ridiculous power of these three powerhouses after getting his perfect body back by absorbing the chakra of Killer Bee and Naruto. And as crazy as it sounds, I just don't think that Nagato, even in his Edo Tensei form, has enough offensive strength to break out of the combo jutsu that's used by the 5 Kage that makes Madara use his perfect Susanoo towards the end of their fight. So no, I'm sorry for all the Nagato glazers out there, I don't think Edo Nagato's able to defeat the 5 Kage. But in a very comparable position to Hashirama, I do believe if this battle happened 10 times, Nagato would win 3 to 4 of those times. Then again, you can make the same exact argument for his battle against Itachi, Killer Bee, and Naruto. But with those two out of the way, let's talk about some people that I do genuinely believe clear the 5 Kage. With our first entry and probably our weakest, and weakest is doing a lot of work here, being White Mask Obito, also known as one Sharingan, one Rinnegan Obito, the Obito who had the 6 paths of pain that were all Jinchuriki with their respective tailed beasts. That version of Obito almost definitely wins in battle against the 5 Kage, and rather consistently, mind you. White Mask Obito was able to battle against the likes of KCM1 Naruto, Might Guy, Kakashi, who was a hard counter to him at that moment in time, mind you, and Killer Bee simultaneously. Do you know how insane that is as a roster of 4 combatants? We've already established the fact that both KCM1 Naruto and Killer Bee are as strong as the 2 strongest Kage of that generation. In the combined force, 4th Great Shinobi World War, Kakashi and Might Guy may be somewhere in the region of Edo Itachi, but maybe even a little bit higher in terms of strength, especially when considering that this was a battle against the Kamui, something that Kakashi is a hard counter to. And still, in this battle, White Mask Obito barely struggled. And the 5 Kage, even though they are comparable in strength to the 4 that fought against White Mask Obito, would have a much worse time because they have no counter to Kamui. On top of this, the 6 paths of pain also need to be dealt with, and the only people amongst the 5 Kage who have any sealing jutsu whatsoever are Gaara and Mai, and Mai's Fu and jutsu are not that strong, at least by themselves. Certainly not strong enough to seal away a perfect Jinchuriki in an Edo Tensei body. And thus I believe White Mask Obito, who is probably the most comparable to Edo double Rinnegan Madara in terms of strength, clears the 5 Kage with relative ease. And thus it's pretty simple to say that Jubito, who is technically a stronger version of White Mask Obito, though I don't necessarily believe it, also clears this battle against the 5 Kage. Because at this point, he's got things like the Sword of Nabucco and 2 Rinnegan. He's the 10 paths Jinchuriki. And while he can't use things like Komboi, and therefore his kid is technically less versatile, the sheer ridiculousness of the power of his kid at this point is something that the 5 Kage have no answer to. And it was at this moment in time that really the only people that would be able to stand against him were the likes of Sasuke and KCM2 Naruto. And to some degree, the next person we're going to talk about, which is KCM2 Minato, who I believe clears the 5 Kage with pretty relative ease.
Oh, you're gonna tell me right now that Edo Minato is able to clear the 5 Kage, but Edo Nagato isn't?
Yeah, I am. I've actually made entire videos talking about how Edo Minato is stronger than Edo Nagato. I'm sorry, you know just as well as I do how ridiculous of a boost KCM2 plus Sage Mode is. I don't care that he said he's bad at it. He's a perfect Toad Sage. And the real reason here that the 5 Kage are getting absolutely destroyed in this battle is because while A has shown the ability to keep up with Minato in base form in terms of speed, as Minato, A, and Killer Bee have come face to face on the battlefield before, they established that he only became the world's fastest shinobi after Minato died, and that was base Minato. And we're not talking about base Minato, we're not talking about KCM1 Minato, we're talking about KCM2 Minato. Considering the fact that KCM1 was enough of a boost to make Naruto as fast, if not possibly faster, than A in his lightning cloak, and the difference between KCM1 and KCM2 is so incredibly distinct that Naruto went from a relative non-factor in the battle against White Mask Obito to an actual intimidating presence and real threat. The fact that A was able to keep up with Minato in base in terms of speed means nothing. And mind you, that is the fastest member of the 5 Kage. Now, yes, an argument could be made that maybe A would be able to keep up with KCM2 Minato if he had Inoki on his back using lightweight boulder jutsu, but that takes Inoki out of the fight, and Inoki has the greatest offensive output out of any of the 5 Kage. Tie all this into the fact that this version of Minato has infinitely refilling chakra, the ability to hop to a different dimension or different area if he's injured so badly that he needs to recover on account of his infinite regeneration, and most likely some kind of extrasensory perception boost with Froggy Kuma Kumite from his Sage mode, and it starts to look real ugly for the 5 Kage real quick. Gaara's sand ceilings are too slow to catch him, and thus the only real way to get rid of him would be to fully dismantle him using Dust Release, and we're not entirely sure if that would even work. On top of this, we've seen slower characters than KCM2 Minato, like Madara, react to Dust Release, which means that there is literally no universe in which KCM2 Minato is ever hit by it. Sprinkle on top of all of that the fact that all Minato literally needs to do is get a mark on every single one of the Kage that he can pop to and slit their throats whenever he wants, and you put the final cherry on top, which is that technically Tsunade is already marked with a Flying Raijin mark because her Hokage guards need to be able to get to her whenever and wherever she is. And we know that different users of Flying Raijin can go to different markings because both Tobirama and Minato can use each other's markings. So Tsunade is out of the fight immediately. Minato could jump to her, grab her, teleport her on the other side of the world, boom, your healer's gone. And after that, it would be curtains for quite literally everyone else immediately. But enough about KCM2 Minato. Yeah, we know even though he was incredibly underutilized and kind of nerfed in a lot of ways that he shouldn't have been, he was crazy powerful. Let's talk about somebody who's kind of the opposite. A person who became much stronger than they ever appeared to be, who accomplished great things in that small amount of time that they were given ridiculous power. I am, of course, talking about DMS Kakashi. See, the 5 Kage were absolutely hopeless in the face of a perfect Susanoo. And mind you, that was Madara Susanoo. And while Madara Susanoo is the biggest out of all of the ones we've seen in the modern era, his Susanoo's kit is objectively worse than DMS Kakashi's. He's got a sword, a big sword, a sword that can cut mountains in half, but he doesn't have Kamui Shuriken, I'll tell you that right now. On top of that, there's absolutely no reason for us to assume that Kakashi Susanoo's AP or DP is lower than that of Madara's. And thus, if there was nothing that any of the Kage could do against the durability of Madara's perfect Susanoo, the same applies to Kakashi. On top of that, DMS Kakashi had a level of speed that allowed for him to keep up with Kaguya, somebody who we can absolutely all agree was faster than this Edo Tensei version of Madara. We have a real, legitimate threat on our hands to wipe out all of the 5 Kage in a matter of seconds. But that's the real issue. Seconds. See, while offensively and defensively and from a speed perspective, Kakashi is a way bigger threat than Edo Madara, he doesn't have the durability, the stamina, or the regeneration of Edo Madara. And thus, if Kakashi's finishing off the 5 Kage, he better do it quickly because DMS Kakashi is not an infinite timeline thing. It has a very finite life, which means that if Kakashi isn't able to accomplish the murdering of the 5 Kage within that finite timeline, he's out of luck. From a chakra perspective, Kakashi's just got way less than Madara. On top of that, it's not infinitely refilling. And the small source of 6-pass chakra that Kakashi's able to use to get DMS comes from Obito, who not only wants it back, but also doesn't have that much to give out in the first place. Unless the combined speed of A plus Inoki and the longevity gifted through working with Tsunade could drag out this fight to make it so DMS Kakashi stops being DMS Kakashi. However, similar arguments that were made for Minato could also be made for Kakashi, as if Kakashi in DMS form was able to simply hit Tsunade with a Kamui Shuriken, that she was like, oh, I don't need to dodge this on account of the strength of 100 seal and the ability to regenerate parts of my lost body, then forced her in her not dodgingness to be immediately teleported to the Kamui dimension, somewhere that she can't get out of, then yes, that longevity factor goes straight out the door. And thus, while I do absolutely believe that DMS Kakashi is able to defeat the 5 Kage in the requisite amount of time that he has to defeat the 5 Kage, I do think he has a more difficult task on his hand than other people on this list, on account of the fact that really nobody else on this list has to defeat the 5 Kage under a timeline. So while DMS Kakashi is probably winning this fight 8 to 9 times out of 10, there's a fairly good chance that 1 out of those 10 times the 5 Kage would be able to stall out DMS Kakashi long enough that he just went back to being regular Kakashi, and then they would be able to win from there. And last, but certainly not least, obviously Naruto and Sasuke can do it. You need me to explain how Naruto, who by the end of Shippuden can make 3 versions of Kurama, jam them together, give him 9 arms and 3 faces, and throw Rasengan that could wipe Konoha off the map with 1/10 of his chakra, beats the 5 Kage in a fight. Sasuke becomes the 10 Tails Jinchuriki, and in a losing battle in terms of chakra affinities, lightning versus wind is able to neutralize Naruto's strongest move with Indra's arrow. Listen, I love Inoki, I love Gaara. They're not stopping Indra's arrow. So yes, obviously, both Naruto and Sasuke are able to defeat the 5 Kage. By the end of the story, they might as well be all 5 Kage anyways. I can make an argument that both Naruto and Sasuke pre-Hagoromo buff could both defeat the 5 Kage. Post-Hagoromo buff, I mean, that's not even worth talking about. Pre-Hagoromo buff, I mean, if Minato's able to do it, Naruto absolutely can. And if we're to assume that KCM2 Naruto and EMS Sasuke are equal in strength, then yeah, Sasuke is also able to do it. And like I said earlier, literally every Otsutsuki in existence would be able to defeat the 5 Kage simultaneously, Kaguya very much included. None of the Kage have the sun or moon seals, so they don't get to just slap her away like Naruto and Sasuke did. They'd have to kill her, something that maybe even the combined forces of Naruto and Sasuke at at the end of Shippuden working together with Sakura and DMS Kakashi wouldn't have been able to do. And with that, we have the somewhat non-surprising list of people that I genuinely believe would have been able to pull off what Edo double Rinnegan Madara pulled off and the defeat of the 5 Kage simultaneously. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. Do you believe that there's anybody else in Naruto who would have been able to pull off this feat? Tell me about them in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm actually probably gonna stay inside. It's gross out.